Mother Knows Death, starring Nicole and Jemmy and Maria QK.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mother Knows Death. On this episode, we are going to be talking about more celebrity death conspiracy theories, the astronauts that were stranded in space finally coming home, a man who lived with his dead girlfriend for 20 days, and not telling your family when you have a terminal illness. We also have a lot more to discuss on today's episode. So let's start off with this newest celebrity death conspiracy theory.
All right, so basically this new docuseries dropped on Apple where these people are saying they believe that Jim Morrison of The Doors is alive, even though we believe that he died back in 1971.
So is this something that is new? Because I know that forever there's been conspiracy theories of him and Elvis and whoever else like still being alive. There's been parodies in movies. Do you remember I think it was like Death Becomes Her. They were, like all those people had taken that potion and there was like this party afterwards and Elvis was there and like things like that, like fun things in movies just acting like these people are still alive. So I mean there was definitely shadiness when he died. So I could understand why people this is exactly why conspiracy theories happen because things aren't done according to protocol, right?
Yeah, I mean, when he died, he was only 27 when he died, and it was just after they finished recording an album, and he was notably dealing with severe drug problems at the time. But basically, he was found dead in a bathtub. They didn't do an autopsy, and then he got buried in Paris, which I thought was really weird. But I don't really know all that much about his life, and maybe if he wanted to be buried there or whatever. But it all seemed to go down pretty quickly. But it is unusual. Like, in my opinion, it's unusual that they wouldn't do an autopsy, especially on such a high profile person.
So was his girlfriend at the time, I don't really know a ton about this. Was his girlfriend at the time from France?
No, I don't think she was. I think that she was American and they met in the United States.
Okay, so well, regardless, they were there and I have seen a couple different things that they were a longtime girlfriend and boyfriend, so there might have been a thing that he was considered to be common law with her, which may give her some rights as far as where he's buried. And maybe, I mean, one possibility is that they just loved that city and that is where she would thought he would have wanted to be buried. But I just have a lot of questions about how it all went down. So I guess the first shady thing is that he died and they didn't alert anybody or the media. Like nobody knew for 6 days and he was already buried by the time the public found out. So his family and friends were very surprised to hear about it. And I feel like her story changed a lot about what happened that night. And
Well, she was a drug addict too, and I think she ended up overdosing not long after him.
so, regardless, her story changed a lot. And then, obviously, when people are on drugs or drinking and stuff, the whole story is going to change. But I guess it did come out to be true years later that the scene was not initially what investigators suspected. So, they came up to the house and found him in the bathtub dead. But then later, when they did some investigation, witnesses came forward and said that it actually this is the newest allegation that it appears that he had an overdose in a nightclub that night and he had been found in the nightclub bathroom bent over the toilet unresponsive, and the people that had sold him the drugs that night had taken him back to the house and put him in the bathtub. Now the shady thing that comes out of that is that these two people who were selling the drugs at the club were these high profile drug dealers that sold to celebrities and they were called aristocrats or whatever. They're really high profile people and they were trying to cover it up. And the very interesting thing is that there's allegations that one of these drug dealers was having an affair with Jim Morrison's girlfriend.
I mean, it's totally possible that this happened. It was also the 70s, so just like it's the 70s, you're in a different country, they have different forensic protocols when it comes to finding a dead person. Um I do think
Clearly no standards whatsoever because this easily could have been figured out. And I guess, we could say this with all sorts of celebrity deaths, that normal protocols aren't followed. And look what happens. Like, so in a normal situation, you would 100% do an autopsy in this case, because the guy's 27, drugs were involved. There's just multiple reasons why you would do an autopsy in this case. The girlfriend said she found them. Like, okay, like, why don't we do the autopsy and figure out what really happened, because we're not listening to people's stories. Because I don't know, there's just been a history of people lying about what actually happened forever. So that's why autopsies are done. So the very first thing that we could notice with just an external exam in a situation like that is if his body was indeed moved after he died. So that could have been something that was done without even cutting his body open, is to be able to tell that. And the way that we could tell that is, so let's say, for example, the story that we're hearing is true, that he did in fact die at the nightclub. So which is also interesting because of what the witnesses said. So they went in the bathroom and they found him slumped over the toilet for an unknown amount of time. And this person that found him had said that he was unresponsive, he was already dead, and he had foam coming out of his mouth and his nose. And this is what is expected to be seen in a person who has had an opioid overdose, because it depresses the respiratory centers in the brain and it causes pulmonary edema, which is fluid in the lungs. So when people are taking their last breaths, that little bit of air mixed with that fluid creates a foam and it froths out through the nose. And at autopsy, you would see that in the lung tissue as well as in the trachea. But so this is important that this guy saw this. But when you die, all of the blood leaves your circulatory system and it starts going to the dependent areas based upon gravity. So, for example, when we do autopsies on people who die in the hospital, when you die laying in bed, when the blood starts leaving your circulatory system, it goes to the lowest point, which would be the entire back of your body. And that's what we see usually in hospital autopsies. But if he died, for example, in the bathroom at this club and was bent over the toilet, so let's say he was kneeling next to it like you would be if you were vomiting, then you would expect to see this blood pooling. This is also called lividity or livor mortis. You would see this in the front of his body wherever he was leaning over. So you would see it in his face and his belly. So even if those guys picked him up and moved him back to the house and put him in the bathtub, you would still expect to see the livor mortis on the front of his body, which to any death investigator, you would be like, that's weird that he has lividity on the front of his body when he was found in the bathtub on his back. So do you understand? Like that to me would be really unusual. I guess the girlfriend said that he had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. And another way that you could explain that is that when a body starts decomposing, the bacteria start breaking down the organs, and this fluid could come, the organs essentially start to liquefy and it could come out of the mouth, especially when the body's moved. So sometimes if we find a body, there's nothing there, and then you move the body just to bring the body to the morgue, and this fluid comes out of their mouth and nose. And it's not really blood, it's like a brownish fluid. It's called purge, but some people mistake it to look like blood. So that's another indication that he was moved, and also that he was decomposing for some time before authorities were called to the house. So this is exactly why autopsies need to be done, because you just can't, especially with people that are on drugs, you can't trust them.
Wait, I have a side note question. So this new show came out this week with Amanda Seyfried on Peacock. It's she's like a cop in Kensington in Philly, and she deals with like all the drug addicts on K&A and everything. But on the first episode of the show, all these women are showing up dead, and then they're saying the medical examiner is just like, oh, they just OD'd, so we're not doing autopsies. Is that standard that they would
No.
find an OD person on the street and just not assume?
No. What they and that was actually interesting to me as a student, because I remember one time, and we had so many drug cases, and this was when it wasn't even super crazy like it is now in Philly. But we had an autopsy on this one guy who was like my age. He was in his young 20s, and he OD'd in the basement of his house, and his parents found him dead. And it was, I just was upset about it, because I was like, this is terrible for parents to find their kids. And the mom said, he's had problems his whole life and this and that. So my first question, because this is when I was a student still, I was kind of like, all right, well, he has injection marks in his arm. He has this long-standing history of overdosing and being on drugs. Like he was found in all the classic ways you would see from an overdose death. Like, why are we doing this autopsy right now? And that's just what happens. They're all done because you don't really know. You just want to confirm it. Toxicology will confirm it. And this is another thing too. Like, you have a guy that overdosed and you didn't even do toxicology. They actually came out and said with Jim Morrison that his cause of death was or his manner of death was natural. And they said that maybe he had
What?
a heart attack. Yes. They didn't even say that the speculation of him overdosing actually didn't even come up until fans it, back in the US were just like, yeah, this guy had like a drug problem and he probably overdosed.
And how is a 27-year-old that's seemingly healthy just gonna have a heart attack and die?
Well, that could happen. So you don't want
I
to
know, but I'm
discredit that.
saying it's not usual, and therefore an autopsy
No,
would
it
be
it
performed to
absolutely
see.
is not usual. And especially listen, when anybody like if you had a 27-year-old that went to the hospital and then got diagnosed with a heart condition, maybe a congenital heart condition that was unknown or something and they died, it might not be indicative to do an autopsy. When you find a 27-year-old dead in a bathtub, like you do an autopsy. You just do. Especially when they have a history of drugs, especially when they're freaking Jim Morrison. Like the whole thing's crazy, but I mean, listen, I don't even know what happened in the 70s in this country, let alone, but I do know because we've covered a lot of celebrity death dissections that happened during this time period. And I do know that they had the ability to see all of these things that I'm talking about right now. They had toxicology, they had the ability to use a knife and cut him open and look at his lungs, look at them under the microscope, and they would easily been able to rest all of this. But I mean, maybe they were afraid of the media getting crazy and they just wanted to like get him in the ground and move on. But I always think it's suspicious when people are very quick to get someone in the ground.
Yeah, well, this is kind of adding to why this docuseries has come out and is really controversial because they're basically alluding to the fact that because of how suspicious his death was and how quickly he was buried and everything, that they think he might have faked his death and that he's this man named Frank that's currently living in Syracuse, New York. So I don't know how this filmmaker came to this conclusion or ended up finding this person named Frank. They did interview this man. I will say, looking at pictures of him and a young Jim Morrison, they do look very similar. But again, this could be solved with a simple DNA test, so I don't know why there's all this
Yeah, and
speculation.
his brother is in the documentary as well, I believe. So that again, very very simple for them to figure that out. And also, I mean, in theory, if he was buried in Paris, his body's still there. Like if you really wanted to know and the brother's the legal next to kin, I mean, it just exhume him and find out. Exhume the body and see if it's him. I mean, this could just be closed. What's the why is it like this? What is there so many questions about? I feel like it's an easy fix.
Well, I feel like it's an easy answer. I was looking online and it doesn't seem like the reviews of the docuseries are that great and saying it's very long and drawn out and not really giving definitive answers. So kind of what's the point? But I think if you just look at the pictures of these people next to each other, you could say that, but everybody has doppelgangers, so you can't just say that this man is Jim Morrison and maybe he is, but like just get the DNA test.
One of the questions that I did have about this though is to see who the beneficiary was because I couldn't really get a clear answer. It seems like she could have been like I said because they were saying that they were common law because he had money, right? And I mean, come on. If this woman was having an affair with the guy that sold him drugs, I mean, it is quite possible that it was just a bad batch or whatever, or he just did too much because that happens often. But it's a little shady that the guy who gave you the drugs that killed you was actually having an affair with his girlfriend. Like, it's just,
Yeah, but what would be the point of inheriting it if she ended up overdosing not that long after him?
well,
Because she
she
was
didn't
just
know
as bad as him.
she didn't know she was going to die. And furthermore, like, if she had any involvement with his death, she probably if it was truly accidental, she might have felt terrible about it. And I mean, anyway, if you do heroin, the chances of you still doing it are just going to be greater, and especially if you have a big loss. So I'm not necessarily saying that it was intentional, but it's also just kind of like it just deems an investigation at the very least.
So I'm sure most of our listeners know about this too, but Jim Morrison's in this like unofficial club called the 27 Club, which is these people that were young and at the peak of their career that ended up dying when they were 27 years old. So in addition to Jim Morrison, there's Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, Janis Joplin. They all died when they were
I think
27.
Heath Ledger too.
Oh, maybe I thought he was a little older, but maybe not.
I'm not
And
sure.
aren't they all drug related deaths?
Yeah.
Every single person that's in this club. So I think that's really interesting culturally that you reach this point and then you're just like, I don't know. I was talking to Ricky about this recently because I really love the Doors music. I know you're not the biggest fan of that era of music, but I really love their songs. And I was saying how I was surprised that the band put up with him because he seemed like such a fucking mess with the way
Well,
he
what do
was
you mean
acting.
why they put up with him? Because he was the band. Nobody
No,
even can
well,
name one of the other members unless you're like a super fan.
No, I know that. So it's like it kind of sucks because you're faced with this person that's such a problem, but he's the face of your band. Like, yeah, they could have kicked him out and got another singer, but it wouldn't have been the
That
same
never
thing.
goes over well.
No, it never would. And it's, it happened with Nirvana too. Like the singers die and then your whole band's over.
I
And it
do see
sucks.
though, like I know that the same thing happened with Kurt Cobain, that he was just kind of over the band and the fame and all of it. And I can see a time where people, especially like if this was he totally could have faked his own death for sure, the way that this went down. But I could see you just wanting to be like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to fall off the face of the earth and act like I died, and I'm just going to assume another identity. One of the things I think I saw from the clip of the documentary was saying that his social security number was still active.
Well, we
Which,
know from other
well,
stories on here that
I was going to say that. I was going to say, like, I'm pretty sure that we just learned that there's like hundreds of thousands of social security numbers that are still active. Like, if he died in Paris and nobody really ever reported it to the United States, then there's a possibility that just that's all it is. Um, unless like someone's physically collecting off of that money, and then they should easily be able to trace that as well. So, whatever. It is interesting. Are you gonna watch it?
I don't know because I watched a couple people reviewing it that said it was like really hard to get through because it was just a lot of nonsense interviews. Because at first I was really interested, but it's 3 hours long. It's 3 1 hour long episodes.
Yeah, I thought so. So how did this get on Apple? If it's on Apple TV, can this just be like some guy who made this low budget, or someone actually had to put money into this? Because I thought that the trailer was a little like weird. It just
I
looked
mean,
like
he
someone
could have
made it in their basement or something.
he could have made it beforehand and then after it was made sold it to Apple to distribute. They don't always have to be involved in the beginning. But I guess my final thoughts are, let's say this Frank person in Syracuse really is Jim Morrison and he did fake his death. Just leave him alone. Clearly he did it for a reason and he wanted to start over. Just let him be and let him live the rest of his life. He's old.
Just tell him to do one more concert, like, or something. I don't know. All
I
right,
doubt.
let's talk about these astronauts because this is super interesting.
Oh my God. So last summer, we reported that these two astronauts had gone up on this Boeing Starliner capsule. Their trip was only supposed to be 8 days, but of course, the capsule had technical difficulties. So NASA decided they were going to hold them at the International Space Station and send the capsule back empty just so there wasn't any risk of their life. But it has taken 9 months to get them home. But finally, on Tuesday night, after SpaceX went up, they retrieved them and they're back on Earth.
This is so cool to me from a medical perspective because a couple years ago, we went to the Kennedy Space Center, NASA in Florida, and we were able to have this breakfast with an astronaut thing, and it was so cool. And so we were able to ask them questions, and I guess I never really thought about it up until then about what happens to you when you go up in space, but you have to think about it that there's no gravity, so the human body is made and designed to live on Earth and with our environment. So there's a lot of different things that happen with these people when they come back to Earth, because think about this, like if you're floating for a while, you're not staying on the ground, you almost lose your ability to walk. Your muscles waste away, your bone density lessens because you're not using them to keep yourself on the ground and to keep yourself upright. And so when these people come back, even if you're only there for a few weeks, when you come back, you have to go through this whole intensive physical therapy thing to get back to walking normal, which is why they were taking them out on stretchers essentially, because those people would fall right to the ground. And it's crazy to think that you're in your 60s or something and you would have to relearn how to walk again. But it's the same thing. Think about when you ride a bike. It's very simple. If you know how to ride a bike, you just get on it. But before you know how to ride a bike, it's just like you have to learn how to use your muscles in a certain way to keep the bike upright in order from falling down. And it's kind of just like what babies have to do when they start walking. So you have to do that again as an astronaut, which is it's kind of cool to think about that's they're dealing with all these medical issues on top of God, the psychological issues I can't even imagine.
No, I mean, it must have been really terrifying. I feel like in some regard they have to be prepared that their trip is not going to be the length it's intended to be, and there could be issues, of course. But going from 8 days to 9 months is extremely long. So, like you're saying, now they have to enter this 45-day rehab program to get like, basically learn how to walk again and just make sure they're okay to just going back to being normal people. It's nuts.
There's also so many other things that happen to the body. There could be like cardiovascular effects, and it's another interesting thing too is with gravity. So when you're standing on the ground, your fluid is in your body is equally distributed from your head to your toes. But when you have no gravity, it all kind of goes up towards your head. So most astronauts that go up into space have problems with this, and they get what's called spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, which is they get a lot of swelling around their eyes, but they can get changes in the pressure in their head. I imagine they get terrible headaches. They're not able to see well. So that's also something that as soon as you come back to Earth, it's like all the fluid goes back down. So then the people might experience dizziness, and it's just like a wild thing to even think about that and experience, because there's not many humans in the world that experience these medical symptoms.
No, it is really cool. And did you see when their capsule landed in the ocean, there was like all these dolphins surrounding it, checking it out?
Listen, that video like looks fake to me. Did you see it? Like,
I
did they
didn't see the
AI
video, I saw
enhance it?
pictures.
No, you need to watch it because you're just like, this is like, it has to be AI enhanced or something. Like, it just doesn't even look real. And maybe it's just because the situation is just unusual, but you're looking at it and you're like, what's happening here right now? Like, this,
Maybe you're just a space truther, so I don't
I,
really know.
I'm becoming a space truther, honestly. Like, the more and more I think about it, and I started really thinking about it when I really did a deep dive into the Chappaquiddick situation. That was a couple years ago when I went there, and I was like so intrigued with the Ted Kennedy Chappaquiddick thing. I wrote up a celebrity death dissection, or well, I guess it would be considered a high profile death dissection in the gross room about it. And that happened like a day or two before they announced a man walked on the moon and he was supposed to run for president. It's just like the whole thing was so weird. And then I'm thinking like, this is just the videos are really terrible, and you look at it and you're like, oh God, this is kind of doesn't look like what they told us it was.
There's a really funny movie that came out last year called Fly Me to the Moon with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, and they are making like the movie set for the moon landing, and it's just like this whole like
Does it look exactly like the moon landing? Like,
yeah, you should watch it because it's pretty funny about like the jokes about it and it being top secret evidence, and yeah, you should definitely watch it. It's pretty funny.
just watch the video of this. If it's the like, I've just seen it a couple times, and it's just like it's just bizarre.
This episode is brought to you by The Gross Room.
Guys, the Gross Room is on sale for only $20 for the whole entire year. So that's for 365 days of what I call gross. Gross pathology means looking at pathology with the naked eye, but gross also implies that it is definitely a little gory, way too gory for Instagram for sure. We have so many cases. I am actually thinking that we might do a celebrity death dissection on Jim Morrison at this point because we need to like do a deeper dive into that story. And it's odd that we haven't covered that yet, but I think that that might be a good story to do. But this week we were working on a two-part Ruby Frank one, which is really, really interesting. Next week, we are going to be working on a case of mistaken identity, unless, of course, I tell you guys all the time there's any breaking celebrity deaths, then we'll definitely do that first. We have just so many different cases. We have the Karen Reed trial with John O'Keefe, and we're going to be talking about that in our next story, actually. So that's a really interesting two-part dissection that you guys might want to read.
Yeah, head over to thegrossroom.com now to sign up.
Okay, so speaking of the John O'Keefe and Karen Reed situation, last night word came out that the trooper that was associated with this case has finally been let go.
Well, he was the lead investigator. So, like, he was more than just a cop involved in the sidelines. He was a major player in
I
this
just
case.
don't understand, like, this, whatever happened, accident, murder, whatever you want to call it, happened in January of 2022, and it took almost 3 whole years to finally let this guy go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think so. This trooper, Michael Proctor, oh my God. So, I don't know if historically you know this, but in the Salem witch trials, there was a person killed named John Proctor. And then
He's
with
a
the victim's
descendant.
name, well, I'm wondering if they are related since it's in the same area. But with the victim's name being John O'Keefe and his name being Michael Proctor, like my brain just has a really hard time with this. But anyway, after Karen Reed's mistrial a couple months ago, Trooper Michael Proctor had been suspended without pay while they did an investigation because during her trial, all these really inappropriate text messages popped up where he was calling her a whack job. He said he hoped she killed herself. There was even, this part where he said he was looking through her phone and he hadn't come across any nudes yet. So obviously that's concerning when it's a police officer investigating a possible homicide. But I don't know. It seems like he had all this other misconduct, and the Massachusetts State Police decided to suspend him and do an investigation. And after their investigation, they decided to officially fire him.
So, isn't it interesting that a couple weeks ago, the federal government, who was also investigating this investigation, had said that they closed their investigation, and now this comes out a couple weeks later? Do you think that their investigation had anything to do with his final determination that they were going to get rid of him?
I mean, yeah, I would say so because I think that they do these investigations and then they present all their findings to a board, and it just takes a couple of weeks to go over everything and make a determination. So they're saying, well, another major problem he had was that he didn't disclose his connection to people involved in this case, which obviously is a major conflict of interest. So I think with all these other things combined, they're just like,
Which is important to note because he was apparently friends with the people where this guy's body was found on the lawn, if you remember. And we just thought it was weird in general that you find a dead body on someone's lawn and you don't even go into the house and search it to see what was happening. Like, that to me was one of the biggest screw ups in the case. But of course you wouldn't search it because you're friends with the people, right? This is why
well,
this
yeah.
is why there's questions with these cases, because of the way they're handled improperly.
So this is what the trial board is saying. They found him guilty of violating 4 department policies, which included sending the inappropriate text messages about Karen Reed, sharing sensitive information about her case with people outside law enforcement, creating an image of being biased against her, and then drinking while on duty in connection to an unrelated cold case.
Yeah, which is exactly what she's being accused of, is drinking and driving. And that whole culture of that whole group of friends is just like that, right?
I was
That's
just
what
going to say that. They all seemed like they had issues with drinking. I mean, they definitely shouldn't have been. She, 100%, regardless of what you think, should not have been drinking and driving. Like, I feel like.
No, I mean, nobody should be.
No, but I feel like a lot in this case is extremely controversial because you're like team police department or team Karen Reed. And I think a lot of Karen Reed supporters are also not acknowledging that she was still doing something bad. It doesn't mean she murdered him, but she still shouldn't have been drinking and driving. And
No.
that's important to acknowledge.
So I got I got a direct message from one of our listeners a few days ago, and she sends me a link to this next case we're going to talk about and said that she was friends with these people. So
Oh my god.
and I wrote her back and I was like, "Wait, you like actually know these people?" And she's like, "Yeah."
All right, so this guy in Milwaukee calls the cops and says his girlfriend's dead, and when they get there, she's obviously been dead for a while, and the scene has clearly been staged. So he admitted that he found her 20 days earlier, but said because he's from another country, he didn't know the laws here about reporting a dead body.
I love that the investigators, because he is from Turkey, so the investigators were like, "Well, how would you report this in Turkey if you lived there?" Like, it's like, come on, that's the biggest bullshit answer. Like, Turkey has accountability for you killing people as well. Like, you can't just,
Yeah.
like, good try though, dude.
Yeah, but he said he went to this is what he is saying. He said he went out to go run an errand for an hour, and when he came back, the girlfriend was just covered in blood. He didn't know what happened. And then he fainted and slept next to her dead body for 20 days because he didn't know what to do. And at one point, he considered taking his life, so he tried to do that with a nail gun. They did find a nail in his head.
Yeah,
So,
so that's true. That all they
interesting
actually found a
development.
nail in his head that was going into his brain at the hospital. They had to remove it. So this is an interesting side note, talking about cases that we have in the gross room. If you just go in there and search nail gun, you're going to see many cases where people not only intentionally put a nail gun in their head to try to kill themselves, but also accidental cases. And you wouldn't believe how many times it actually happens and people go to the hospital and have to get a nail removed out of their head. But the imaging is just crazy that you could see it going right through the person's brain. Um, so in this case, it was obviously like, this is what you're going to do. You find this person there, and 20 days dead is really disgusting. So she was probably really decomposed. And on top of that, you do the autopsy and it's just like, "Oh, well, how did she die exactly? Because we've found 12 knife wounds, sharp force wounds in her body that severed multiple organs, and her cause of death was a massive bleed." Like, what's your story now, dude?
Well, he still denied killing her, but he admitted he did move her body. And they're alleging that he only finally called about it because the landlord was going to be coming into the apartment to inspect it because they were getting evicted.
So when they did the investigation, of course, they were able to find. So they found surveillance of him going to a store and buying lots of cleaning supplies. There was evidence that there was a lot of blood there, and there was evidence that someone tried to clean it up. Then they found surveillance footage of him buying a nail gun, which was the day after she had died. So yeah, you're cooked, dude. And I can't believe that someone that listens to our show like knows these people.
No, I
It's
really
it's just
can't
like,
either.
could you imagine just knowing a couple, even knowing that their relationship may be tumultuous or whatever, and just hearing this, especially hearing someone that you know gets killed as bad, but knowing that he was like laying along her dead body for 20 days. And I just think like, with a stabbing death, especially, all that blood would just smell so terrible after 20 days and just be like matted into the carpet. I just, it's just so weird, right?
No, it's just very disturbing.
Okay, so I was reading this Dear Abby. I love the Dear Abbeys, even though they're not technically news stories, but they are because they were in the news this week. But this woman was saying that she had a terminal illness and she didn't know what to do about it.
Well, not that well, she didn't know what to do about it, but she was also asking for advice because she doesn't want to tell her family about it. So, how do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know. I think that her reasoning is just, she said since she was 13, she was dealing with suicidal thoughts and depression and self harm. And it's weird how it was mentioned that she said that she's dealing with an illness that can kill her. Like, what does that even mean exactly?
Like, is it a terminal illness or is it
Or is
something that
she just
just has.
suicidal? I don't know. Um, but she doesn't want to tell her children and kids, and I don't know. I think that most people, like, from a mom's perspective, I feel like if I told my kids right now that I was going to be dying next year, it would like ruin their life for the next year. But, for, right? And I just wouldn't want to put that on them. But also, the benefit, I guess you would say, of knowing that you're going to die is that, like, you can tell your family and talk to your family every single day till that time about everything with your life and just like things that a lot of people don't get when one of their loved ones just drops dead. So I understand like you don't want to upset your husband and child, but your husband and children also love you and they would probably want to support you and help you like before you die be happy in your life so when you finally do shut your eyes for the last time like you know what I mean, that you feel like you were loved and you weren't dealing with all that by yourself.
Well, I just think there's elements to consider with this case. She said she had something that could kill her. Like, I think having a definitive terminal illness is something that's a little different. Because if you're dealing with something that you know you're going to die from, I, I don't know. I struggle with it. I understand, but in the same breath, I think it's a little selfish because you're not giving your family the time to process your loss, even though it is your illness and you should deal with it however you see fit. But you don't want them thinking that you were suffering and they weren't doing enough to help, and then they have to live with that guilt the rest of their life. I just think it's really an
I don't
interesting
know, like,
discussion
I
to
think
have.
Abby had said you should tell them. I do understand where she's coming from,
I
though.
understand not telling the kids right away because, like you said, you don't want to ruin their life. But the husband, I feel like you should definitely be telling because also, if you are getting sick, like Abby said, he's going to notice that you are changing and visibly dying.
Well, and the same could be said about kids. A lot of times you think that, like, oh, kids, that's I even say that with you sometimes because sometimes you'll be talking about an adult matter and one of the kids will say, like, what did you mean? And you're just quick to say, like, oh, nothing, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, they can understand. If you talk to them in a certain way, they could understand a lot more than we think they could understand. And they should be privy to some conversations as well as far as that. Like, kids are very, very intuitive to know when something's off in the house, whether you know what I mean, and like I think it's respectful to them to talk to them about it.
And I don't think you necessarily have to give them every detail and be like, I'm dying, but you could prepare them for it by being like, I'm sick,
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
You don't have to be like, I might drop dead tomorrow, so get used to your time with me, but I don't know. I definitely think it's important to confide in family because also why would you want to suffer through something like that alone?
Yeah, I'm not
There's a there's a show called The Big C that came out probably 15 years ago with Laura Linney and it's the same concept.
yeah,
Like she
I
gets
mean it's just
diagnosed
hard,
with
it's hard to
cancer.
say because you and I have never been in that situation, and until then it's like you just don't it's the same thing with a lot of these stories that we talk about. It's just like you just don't really know like how you would react until you were in that particular situation.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to questions of the day. Every Friday at the Mother Knows Death Instagram account, you guys could head to our story and ask us whatever question you want. First, have you done an autopsy on someone with more than the normal amount of organs?
Yeah, I have. In any case, when you do like an autopsy on somebody that has a kidney transplant, it's a very interesting fact that most people don't know, that when you get a kidney transplant they leave the old kidney in there. So I've done autopsies on people with 3 and 4 kidneys. Also you could get accessory organs like an accessory spleen. Sometimes you could get multiple of those. So in cases like that, yeah, for sure I've had that happen.
Okay, 2. What motivated you to start educating the public with your website and YouTube?
I guess it first started with me doing autopsies at the hospital, and we had this conference every week, which was called the Gross Conference, where we would present organs from autopsy and surgical pathology to medical residents, medical students, surgeons, attending physicians. They would come down to the morgue and we would talk about all of the interesting cases for the week, which was super cool because not only were we helping and educating them about the patients they were actually taking care of, but we were also really able to explain like what we were looking at from our perspective, which is always helpful for doctors to just be very integrated in how we diagnose things. And that conference stopped happening, and that was like a huge missing piece of my life because I really enjoyed doing that. So then I decided that I was going to make a blog and just start writing about the interesting cases that I was seeing. Um, but it was just like I was just doing it and I was writing every single day, like all this stuff. Because Maria was older at that point and she didn't need like mom attention as much as like an 8-year-old. She knew when to go take a shower and stuff. Like I didn't have to be like, you know what I mean? Like she was kind of self-functioning as a teenager at that point. So I had time on my hands and I was done college at that point. So I would come home and write for a couple hours and it was really awesome. But like no, I just would think like, how is anybody going to see my blog? And then my husband had suggested to me, I guess he was my boyfriend at the time, and he had suggested to me like, hey, why don't you take these pictures and then just write these things for Instagram, but just make them shorter, like an Instagram post. And then Maria was, like I said, she was a teenager. She was 18 at the time. And she helped me set up the Instagram account because I didn't like, I'm a boomer, right? So I don't know how to, I don't know how to use social media. And it kind of just went from there. Like it picked up right away, like very fast after being on there. And then I just kept doing the same thing that I had been doing for years, just in a shorter format.
All right, last, what's your best parenting advice?
I guess I guess I would say the best thing is just to have like an open relationship with your kids so they don't feel like they have to like hide stuff from you. Um, I don't know, like what do you think? I think that was good with like whenever Maria was having some kind of like difficult situations that she would always like come to me and just tell me about it because I guess the biggest things for kids to understand is like you might be having a hard time or you might be in trouble, but you might upset me too, but like ultimately like I'll always love you, so like I could help you more than anybody else could help you. So just don't be afraid to tell me something. Like
I think you had a really good balance with me in particular with our situation of being like a good mixture of my friend and my mom. Because sometimes it goes one way or the other, where people are like all parent and they have like no casual relationship with their kid where they don't feel comfortable going to them. Or you have the parents that are 100% your friend and then your kids are like getting into trouble because you're just letting them do whatever they want. But I think you figured out a really good balance of that. And I did always feel comfortable telling you everything. I mean, I still have like diarrhea of the mouth when I talk to you about everything. So.
yeah, exactly. But it's better to be that way than to be hidden because then I mean now you're older, but with kids, little kids and teenagers especially, like it's like the most crucial thing ever because that's when they can really get into trouble with major things that will affect the rest of their life.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
Like
I think
I
you
want
did.
my kids to feel comfortable calling me and saying, I'm at a party and people started doing things here that I'm not comfortable with and I want to come home. Like things like that. Because normally a parent might freak out about that and just be like, why are you hanging out with people that do drugs? And you're just like, no, I want you to call me at 3 a.m. and I will come, whatever. And like, honestly, my kids don't want to ever leave the house. So I don't even know if that's ever going to be a situation, but you never know. And I always want that to be a thing that they feel like they could come to me whenever they're in trouble.
Well, thank God I succeeded at being a good big sister and got them hooked on The Sims.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
they'll just end up being
Total
nerd
tech
old
nerds.
ladies
Yeah.
like me. Never go out. All right, well, thank you guys so much. Please leave us a 5-star written review on Apple. And if you have a story for us, please submit it to stories@motherknowsdeath.com.
See ya. Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.